from Reason. Very pleased to have with us Jacob Sullum. Jacob, thanks for coming back on the show, sir.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, today is the day in the Senate. The debate is continuing right now. Vote looks like it's set for 4 o'clock Eastern, and as we talk, folks are saying that it doesn't look like there are the 60 votes needed for the Schumer-Toomey Manchin legislation. You've got a piece up at Reason.com right now checking the logic of background checks, and how dare you even mention logic, you cold, heartless freak, Jacob. I mean, don't you know this is about love? This is about
Well, I get that
puppies
a
and
lot.
stuff. You get it a lot, huh?
Yeah, I actually just wrote a post about some of the I can't even call them arguments. Some of the reasons that people gave for deciding to support various gun control measures, and they just don't make any sense. Like, even on their face, you can't even argue with them because they're not really logical at all. So, for example, Harry Reid said that he had decided to support an assault weapon ban because he suddenly realized, always opposed to assault weapon bans, but he suddenly realized that all the people who were against them were a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists. That was his reason. So he doesn't want to be grouped together with those guys, and now he's for it, even though he still can't explain why he thinks it would do any good. And similarly, people, told these emotional stories about massacres that had nothing to do with background checks, like the one in Connecticut, and like the one, for that matter, in Virginia, where he actually passed a background check.
Right.
And they're citing these cases that where background checks could not possibly have made a difference, or they actually did a background check and the guy passed it, as an argument for extending that requirement to private sales. So, I mean, at the very least, you'd think you should have an example where, this guy bought a weapon from a private seller, and he shouldn't have had it, and it's only there for the background check, we want to stop it. That would have a certain logic to it, right? But they're not even making a pretense of logic by saying, here is a case that illustrates the problem we're trying to address. The examples they cite are totally illogical in terms of the policy that they're trying to promote.
Well, absolutely, but as we've talked about, logic has flown out the window. I mean, this is, Jacob. This is, I almost want to call it the Oprahfication of American politics, where Senator Blumenthal said, it's about love. And I just went on this little rant about, we don't outsource our showing love to politicians. That's a horrible idea. Why would we ever want to do something like that? We can show love. That's perfectly evident from what we've seen in the aftermath of the bombings in Boston. The American people can show love on our own, and we don't need to tell politicians, well, it has to take the form of specific legislation.
And, when you have people crying,
right.
and offering, like Joe Manchin, literally crying while meeting with his fellow senators, please vote for this. I'm crying here, as if that's an argument. Something has gone terribly wrong. If that ultimately persuades people, which it may very well, there's really something wrong with that. I mean, give me a rational reason to vote for this thing. Make your best case, and then we'll decide whether I want to vote for it. Don't come to me crying and tug at my heartstrings. It really, this is what congressional debate has been reduced to.
Yeah, that's kind of that's a very scary thought, Jacob, that it really is this this raw, naked appeal. And I guess maybe the one silver lining, I don't want to count eggs before they're hatched, but if the votes are not there, then do the people who conducted this campaign of shame, do they go back to the drawing board and say, all right, well, we can't shame politicians, we can't shame the American public by scolding them repeatedly for 4 months straight? Is this the last we'll see of this type of heavy-handed tactics, or do you think they'll just continue?
I think they'll continue. I mean, they clearly have moved people. They've changed people's votes, these tactics. They work in that sense. Whether they'll actually have enough votes to pass it is another matter. But they do work in the sense of getting people to change their votes, which is appalling and alarming. That's how people, legislators are making their decisions. But it's really the main thing they have that the gun controllers have going for them are these emotional arguments. Because when you get down to the actual rational arguments in favor, I mean, this is what I tried to address in my column today, the rational arguments in favor of expanded background checks, they're just not very strong, And you can speculate about how this might, theoretically prevent some guy from getting a gun and he won't, get it through other means that are not monitored. But it doesn't carry much weight compared to the burden you're going to be imposing on every single, law-abiding gun owner who wants to sell a weapon.
Absolutely. And to that end, Jacob, I mean, if you are a ardent gun control supporter, you shouldn't really be in favor of this bill unless, again, it's now just politics and you want to be able to say, well, aha, the gun lobby is weakened now. Because, as you point out, in this 2004 inmate survey, you say 3 sources accounted for almost 90% of guns that were traced back to crimes. Friends or family was 40%, the street 38%, and theft 10%. This is why there's this push for quote-unquote universal background checks for private transfers, even between family members. And this is so watered down from that, I can't imagine, true blue believers in gun control thinking that this is going to be effective.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, they make a big deal out of gun shows, but in that survey, as you mentioned, it was under 2% who said of these criminals said they got their guns that way. They're making a big deal now out of so-called online sales, or basically guns that are advertised online,
right?
Where it's a private seller, and buyers and sellers find each other through the internet, and they arrange a transaction. It's no different in principle from doing the same sort of thing through a classified ad in a newspaper, magazine, or a flyer, or word of mouth. But they're upset about that. And if you look at that survey again, nobody mentioned anything about the internet, and it's hard to see how that even fits into any of those categories that they did mention as sources of guns. So this looks again like it's something that gets people upset because it's relatively conspicuous. Gun shows are also conspicuous. They're things that are announced. They're big events, right? You notice them.
Right.
Criminals actually tend not to buy their guns, surprisingly, in conspicuous ways. They tend to prefer more discreet sources, right? So that's why they're getting it from friends and families and on the streets from black market dealers, because that kind of thing attracts less attention, but that's actually where most of the action is. And so there's really no hope that this kind of measure, saying, oh, let's have background checks for online sales or let's have background checks for sales at gun shows, there's really very little prospect that's going to have much of an impact on criminals, because even the few who are getting their guns through those methods can use other methods. Yeah. And how are you possibly going to impose this requirement on all private transfers if you try to take a broad approach and actually make that stick? Not possible to do that. I mean, this is why people started to talk about, are you going to have a national gun registry? Because if you start to think about how do we seriously going to enforce it, you would need something like that. You would need to know where all the guns are, when anybody is transferring them, making sure they do the background check. Well, of course, if they don't do that, you're basically just imposing this notional requirement that these people selling guns to criminals aren't going to pay any attention to anyway. They're not really persnickety about and conscientious about following federal law when it comes to, it's already illegal. It's a felony to sell to somebody that is disqualified from owning a gun. They don't care too much about that. So why do we think we're suddenly going to start doing background checks?
Oh, exactly right. Well, listen, Jacob, thank you, sir, for talking logic. I know you get in trouble when you do that, but we appreciate it out there beyond the bubble.
Sure. Thanks.
You bet. Jacob Sullivan joined us from Reason Magazine here on Cam and Company.